So I'm JP Stoops, co-founder of this event. And just to give you background on where you are, this is SOSV. They're a venture fund that funds a number of different accelerators, Hacks being a hardware accelerator, IndieBio being a biotech accelerator. I went through Hacks, I started a tech toy company and continue to work at it here, and so they were gracious enough to host this event. This is not a Hacks sponsored event, but we're happy to have everybody here. The background of this meetup is that we used to have a kids smart toy meetup, and Caitlin and Josh with creativity also had a kids meetup, and they sort of, as these things do, they fell out of habit, and our goal here is really to just bring people together, creators, brands, inventors, people with ideas, and we formalized it a little bit more with panel discussions, just to add some value, but it's really a networking event for everybody here. So the goal here will be, we'll do about a half an hour panel and then maybe 10 minutes of questions, and then just get on to just continuing to network and meet everybody here. So that's me, and Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Gutekunst. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Business Development at Creativity. Also a panelist tonight, so I'll be interviewed by my illustrious co-founder. But I wanted to just read the room and have a quick understanding of how familiar everybody is with voice, so we know how deep to get. So who has a voice-enabled device at home, either an Alexa or a Google or something? Okay, almost everyone. Okay, great. And how many people are using it for more than just the weather? More than the weather? More than the weather. Awesome. And how many people are actually developing any products right now, whether it's apps or different interactions that have voice as enabled in it? Okay. Wow, this is great. Okay. So that's fantastic. We are focused on both digital and hardware devices that have voice powering them. But we are specifically interested in how that's going to affect kids, future generations, and families. So that's one of the focus that we chose for the meetup group moving forward, is how that's going to be, creating the consumers of tomorrow and the kids of today. So with that, I think it's time to start the panel. Excellent.
All right. Well, we're going to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves. So I gave my introduction, so we'll start here with Ron.
Trip you up there. Hi, my name is Juan Martinez, and I have a company called Headcanon. That's CANON, 2Ns.com. And it's a voice publishing platform. I've been building entertainment, education, information software for several decades in a variety of platforms. Mostly, almost always focused on narrative storytelling and engaging people in those kinds of ways, whatever affordances the platforms provide. I was also Vice President of Intellectual Property Innovation at Yahoo when it was very innovative. And that was, I left 2009. But it was great. I worked with great inventors across the company in mobile, social media, and commerce. And so that's who I am.
I'm Sandra from Wunder. We are actually we are a Hacks-based and funded company, and we are building a smart parenting assistant. So it's kind of like your Alexa or Google Home, but for new parents. And it has an assistant that helps you do hands-free logging of things like diapers or feeding, sleep in the earliest age of the child. And then it also supports their cognitive development by tracking milestones and recommending activities, and just like supporting the parents in their parenting experience. And I'm working on the product side, doing a lot of user testing and strategy, also partnerships.
I realize I said my title, but not what I do. So Creativity Inc. is a design studio that has been around for over 20 years. We're based in San Carlos. We do work for hire in the toy industry as well as invention in the toy industry. And then about 3 years ago, we started working with Google on some projects for this emerging voice platform. And since then, we've gone on to launch over 20 projects for big brands, mostly in the kids space, but also outside of that, for brands like Disney Music and Stranger Things with Netflix, Coachella. So it's brought us into a wider arena of entertainment and other things. And we've also created a few smart home and gadgets. So we're doing hardware products as well.
Perfect. Well, great. Well, Ron, how about I start with you here? So you've started several companies. I learned tonight that you have over 60 patents to your name, and now you help companies use storytelling to get their message across. So how are companies using voice tech to tell their story? How has voice tech evolved? And what advice do you have for somebody who might want to tell their story or their brand story through a voice-enabled product?
Right. Great questions. I mean, I think we're still at an early stage for companies to understand that this is a medium that is growing very rapidly. People do tend to think about, you can even see the naming of the voice apps, skills. The skill is it the device that has the skill, or do I have the skill, right? And an action. Is it the device that's doing something, or is it me? So I think right now, it's remarkable to me that so many brands, companies, properties, intellectual property, entertainment, or other, have no voice presence at all in this medium. If you say, Alexa, open Wired magazine, clueless, right? How is that possible, right? And so starting there, developing a presence. So once you think of sorry about that. Once you start with a presence, then, okay. So the first place is to come up with a presence. And then what is it that you're trying to communicate? In our case, we're doing episodic storytelling, which could be for marketing, for pure storytelling, or for learning, where it's paywalled, and the paywall might be that you pay money, or like an in-app purchase, or you provide contact information. We do opt-in in a classic marketing sense. That's the first point. But then how do you engage? What is it that you're delivering? And the best way to engage people is with story, I think, and giving them the expressivity as a user to do something interesting. So we're seeing that kind of thing. I work a lot with publishers and creators in that sense.
And do you see it as a marketing play to tell your story, or are there brands that are monetizing in the voice-enabled space?
Yeah, so both, right? For the monetization, people are building fairly elaborate, on this Headcanon platform where you don't have to write code, you can build a scenario, are building, complete programs where there's a lot of, additional interactivity once they've gotten past the paywall. And they're charging money for that. And they're companion pieces with books, for example. Right, so what we see is that it is going to be, and we're sort of betting on and working towards making it a first-class media form. You have, print books. Let's just say books, for example. Print books. Then you had e-books. You will have v-books. An audiobook is one thing. A voice book is another, because it does need to have interactivity, and it also needs to conform to the way that people tend to like to work with voice devices. They don't want to sit for an hour and listen. They want a lot of interactivity. So there's a lot to be designed and figured out, but it's a lot of fun.
Great, thank you. Sandra, so now you work with a company that's creating the hardware device designed for the baby's nursery, as you described.
Mm-hmm.
So what led Wunder, or what led you to creating the hardware version versus just building out a skill in the Alexa or Google Home stores? And go ahead.
No, that's a very good question, and we get it a lot because hardware is hard, and we didn't really want to build it. But the problem is that we want to use our own algorithm that monitors for the number of words and conversations that you actually exchange with a child. And why we monitor that is that because this is the key predictor of child's IQ, actually. So how much you talk directly translates into how cognitively stimulated your child's brain is. So it's kind of like a Fitbit model where we track how much you talk so you can be motivated to talk more. And for us to be able to use this algorithm and actually be able to see what parents are talking about, so that we can also give insights about the quality of the speech itself, we had to build our own device, because currently if we use Google or Alexa, we will not get insight into the raw data itself. Now this might change over time. We don't know what Alexa, and Amazon will do. Will they actually give third parties access to it over time or not? Because there's this shift from those big kind of platforms into some more niche products that are self-built. But that was the main reason why we decided to do it on our own, to get access to the data. And I think a good example of this is also a company that we spoke to that builds a smartwatch for kids, and they wanted to enable voice on that smartwatch. So let's say that a child could talk to it and ask for, I don't know, when was some president elected, when they do their homework. And the problem is that for this company, they're using Alexa, which means they actually don't know what questions kids ask. So they can't even optimize the product going further. Like, they just offer that feature, but they cannot evolve it over time. So that would be the drawback of that solution.
Great, thank you. Now, Caitlin, so you work with a company who's developed traditional products for years and has recently started creating voice-enabled products and apps. So how did that transition come about, and what is one of your favorite experiences that you have launched on the voice-first platforms, and what should companies consider with voice tech today?
Yeah. So creativity is a long history in building very engaging, fun, intuitive products for kids. As mentioned, they launched over 20 years ago, and in the lifetime of the company, we've brought over 7,000 products to market. And that's anything from interactive toys to mobile apps to connected toys, and now many voice interactions. And the company started around audio and building engaging audio experiences in the toy space. And so some of our partners from the beginning include Hasbro and Mattel and Fisher-Price, and actually Leapfrog in the early days. There's some Leapfrog friends out there. So since then, or right after starting the company around audio, we started diversifying into other types of interaction designs that support that. So user flow, user testing, programming, both on the software side and on the firmware side, just so that we could help support all of the content that was being delivered. And if you think about how a child is interacting with a Tickle Me Elmo, which is one of the first products that our CEO has worked on, you have a product that has a couple of inputs that aren't extremely intuitive once you're taking it out of the box, and you're guiding them through a play experience without a screen and other types of inputs. Sound tends to be a lot of the inputs that are driving interactivity on toys. Of course, there's been a whole evolution with all the screens becoming more cost efficient, being able to use those, and now like mobile devices and tablets taking over, but we're seeing the backlash of that and some resurgence. And then of course, voice is opening up a new way to power interactions like never before. I really do look at voice as a new interface rather than being a channel. I think in the early days when we were getting involved in voice, people thought about it as, like the next YouTube, or like, is Alexa the next YouTube or the next Instagram? Do I have to play on that platform? And really it's not. It's like a new button or a new touch screen interface. Like, you need to have a strategy for how you are going to design your products in a space where kids are growing up with being able to navigate through things with their voice as an option. So anyhow, our competency in designing intuitive products for very young, often non-readers, and being able to do so using audio and a very technical expertise on low-cost products kind of set us up for a space where we could take that expertise and run with it. And over time, we've worked on a lot of the greatest brands: Star Wars, Disney Princess, Elmo, Sesame Street, Nickelodeon's properties. So we've had a lot of experience working with some of the greatest content providers out there.
Fantastic, perfect. Well, it was a great introductory question from each of you, learning a little bit about the trends and why you might choose not to use the dominant platforms, and how this is a new sort of, I'm going to call it channel, but what was the word you used?
I said interface.
Interface, okay. And So I'm going to open it up and just ask some general questions here, and I've got a few, but I also want to be able to allow the audience to ask any in particular. But I think that the first question that comes with smart products, IoT products, and certainly voice-enabled products is security and privacy, particularly here with the focus being on kids, families. So how do we manage the security and privacy, both when you're operating on existing platforms and also when you're building your own?
Sure. We have to think about it a lot because, as you would imagine, parents really care about that, and there's been a lot of stories around hacking into baby monitors and things like these. So what we do is kind of multi-level. One thing is you can only trigger the monitoring of your audio when you say, "Hey, Wunder." So you have a trigger word, and we give the user control to kind of know when it's monitoring to the speech. We actually wanted to initially do kind of all-day monitoring because that would give the most accurate results as well in terms of how much you're talking. But we clearly saw from user testing that this was a bit of a scary option. And if you give users that control to trigger it, they just feel much more secure. Even if that means monitoring specific interactions, let's say reading or intentional play, rather than the whole day. Another thing is obviously, a mute button on the device and being able to completely switch it off if you want to. We also, all the data is encrypted, so you cannot link it back to a particular user. And we also auto-delete the data after 1 month. And you can opt in as a user for us to store the data for longer and use it to optimize the assistant itself, but that's an opt-in. So I think privacy as a default is kind of the strategy that we're taking.
Just one thing that I think is really important for developers is on at least Google and Amazon, they are taking the liability from a copy perspective. So a lot of the AI commutation is happening in the cloud, and unless you build in certain triggers, you're not getting full transcripts that are links to a direct user. There are also child-directed safeguards that you can put so that if you launch a skill, you can mark it as safe for children, and then they have another layer of parent enablement for those apps. So it's actually, in some ways, having a mobile background, it's almost a safer place to be as a small developer because you have the bigger platforms taking on some of that risk for you.
I don't really have much to add to that in a substantive way, but I did ride the F train down here, and I started talking to an Australian family I was visiting, and they asked what I did, and I told them what I was doing, and they said, "Oh, well, we have a Google, Google's big in Australia, and we were a little concerned about from a privacy perspective, is it watching us?" And I said, "Well, actually, I recognized you people. A couple of weeks ago, I came across your living room."
Perfect. Yeah. No, it is interesting how
and it's true. No, that's not true.
How quickly things have changed. I mean, I think if we were having this panel 3 years ago, there would be different conversations and different comfort levels. I mean, I'd say 90% of this audience raised their hand that you have a smart home speaker in the house, and I think now it is 200 million, or a quarter of all households have a smart speaker at home. I have a 2.5-year-old at my home, and the family that we do a share care with has an Alexa. He came home speaking to devices saying Alexa. I said, no, that one's not smart. So we did introduce Alexa into our living room this year because Amazon, they made it very easy. It was extremely cheap, and it was like an add-on item. So it's what's happened in 3 years is pretty crazy, and some of the stories that even came out in the kids tech space 3 years ago. And I think you will still see a lot of press and individuals or people trying to hack and to create those stories. But there is this general acceptance that this is a technology that is here, and it's actually here to improve things. And if the progress that's been made between Siri and Alexa is any indication, I think we're moving very rapidly towards a pretty, a typeless experience.
Yeah, and related to that, and also to the question of platform versus channel versus interface and so on, it's been my experience in going from pathway books for kids to graphic adventures to CD-ROM based things, and then networked and massively multiplayer games and narrative simulations. But as platforms evolve, the capabilities of those platforms form a new creative and sort of experiential palette, right? And each one of them brings more I have this notion that the degree of the richness of interactivity relates to the expressiveness of the user. It's not how much and how rich the experience is that you receive, it's how much you're able to do. And there is a differentiating kind of capability in each one of these platforms. And so I do see and believe with voice the differentiator, and it's an obvious statement in some ways, is a conversational experience. Very different from barking out no, yes, like using your voice to press a button. There was a fellow, Chris Crawford, who was a game designer, Balance of Power. Mark knows him well, I'm sure. And he had this notion of interactivity, which is a conversation where I say something, you hear it, you process it, you say something back, which I did not expect. I process it, and we end up with a loop that is generative. That, I think, is the differentiating capability of these platforms. And we're scratching the surface from an aesthetic, technical, and other standpoint. And, when we do that, then we'll begin to see things that could only live in these voice and conversation. We're very early now. We're still cutting and pasting things from other mediums into voice.
Great. We'll keep going here. I want to offer a question from the audience. Great.
Caitlin, I think you brought up COPPA. Could you explain what that is and how it's relevant to voice designers and developers?
Yeah, it's the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, and it was established 10 plus years ago to help protect children's privacy online, and that mainly covers advertising and the way that you're targeting them and how you follow them online, but also their PII, which is the private information. So, it's critical to make sure that kids are able to operate online safely and that their image and, of course, their address and who they are is protected, and that they're not followed through their experience so that you can target them from birth for advertising, etc. So it's part safely, we want to make sure kids are not being preyed upon, and then it's part, these aren't really mindful consumers yet, so we shouldn't be targeting them and following them. But it's really big in mobile because that's one of the first real personal devices that you carry around with you, and you can really tell where people are by such information as when they're logging into their Wi-Fi device or what type of device they're using. So if you glean all those insights, you can really tell who's using a device, and every device has a personal identifier. And voice, a lot of these products are being used in the home. We're seeing a proliferation of devices now where everybody's trying to go after the home or the office, or hearables, which are wearables that you put in your ear that have other smart devices. So there's starting to be all this data and ways that you can kind of understand where a consumer is and what they're using. So it's going to continue to be important, but thankfully not something that developers are supposed to focus on yet.
And COPPA is for the under 13, or what's the age range? Because
technically it's for under 13. Europe launched GDPR last year,
right.
And so in Europe it varies by age based on who sets it. So it could be as high as 16 or even 18. And then just January 1st, California rolled out their own protection services, which is really going to set the standard for everybody nationwide, because if you want to do business with consumers here, you have to adopt that. And I think a lot of that was based on GDPR.
And that's the ability to go in and see what data has been collected about you.
And to delete it if you'd like.
Got it.
I just think consumers aren't mindful. They're like, oh, this thing's so cute, It's easy to use. I don't have to put my glasses on when I'm trying to get the weather. You know, it's great. It opens up awesome accessibility opportunities and like quick interactions to get from one thing to the other. So it's super assistive, but nobody really understands what's happening behind the scenes.
Indeed. Any other questions from the audience? Well, I've got one. So in my mind, to create a voice-enabled product, I need a team of engineers and a massive budget. You know, is there a way to build a voice-enabled product on a budget? And what tools can a person or company use to create one?
Yeah.
So if you want to learn, build, or even teach voice user experience and voice experiences, recommend VoiceFlow. There are a number of tools. VoiceFlow, I've been making tools, using tools and systems for a long time. It's just, you know, damn near perfect. It's a visual design tool. You know, something like where you're kind of laying out the flows of a conversation and all the things, you know, designers know when you build a sort of straight through experience, everything is great, but what about when they say something else or when things go wrong? You can see all that, but the beauty of it is it's not just a visual diagram, it's actually code. You press the button, push it to Amazon, and you can ship it. It's a very beautiful no-code design and development system. Free to sign up. You can even ship products without ever paying a dime. Great. So I would recommend to everybody just to dive in. I mean, it's the best way to learn is by doing, the best way to, or by teaching it. So.
I think I'm in the middle between it. So Creativity designed our own proprietary tool stack that does this, and I think it's solving a great need because, I mean, you really need to have a great pair of technical people plus creatives who work together and understand the limitations of the platform, both from a technology perspective, but also an interaction, how that affects the conversation. There are conversation designers now and all these emerging jobs, which are awesome. So our response to that was to design our own proprietary tool set, which we build in-house that allows us to launch to multiple platforms after building once. But we use it for our own, and a lot of what we build are kind of like white glove from start to finish interactions.
Just briefly, is the voice that comes out of your proprietary system, is it unique for each product? Or is it sort of a generic robotic voice that works inherently with your proprietary system?
So let me clarify. So we're using tools that are existing, but the kind of solution that we've built is in-house. It's not a full solution that someone who doesn't have a technical background could go on and design their own conversation flow. But to answer that question, we can access the library of voices on Amazon or Google, or a lot of what we do is fully voiced, where we're working in one of our studios or with one of our partners and taking what they've recorded and flowing that out.
So you could have a vampire voice.
Sure.
Let me just a quick coda to that. Also, check out a company called Resemble.ai. There's a couple of them. Other one is Repli.ca, Replica. And what they do is similar to Amazon's neural text-to-speech. They can impose the sort of cadences and mannerisms of a person's voice. That's what they did Samuel L. Jackson recently. But Resemble, for example, you can get up there and start training it up with your voice. So if you have a stable of voice actors, or you just want to, torture people with your own voice.
Great. So voice flow, Resemble, creativity. What is Wunder? What is Wunder using, Sandra?
So I think we're privileged because we actually do have the technical skill in our team to build the demo. But it is very easy to actually build a simple demo at this point, even on a tablet. So just last week we were going to homes of our early users and actually testing the assistant that we've built, and it was just an assistant based like on a computer, and we just had our hardware linked to the computer, and we kind of like in a hacky way made it work. But you can easily prototype and just test with the users those interactions that you're focusing on. I think the advantage that we have is also that we kind of intentionally make our assistant a bit dumb so that it only does specific functions like logging, diapers, feeding, sleep, giving activity recommendations. So you can't really, or the users don't expect to have a full-on conversations with them. So that makes it easier for us. But just in terms of the different ways in which a parent could, let's say, ask to log a dirty diaper, like there are hundreds of ways in which they do it. And so what we did is we would just be sending out surveys to our beta testers and just asking them to brainstorm, 10 ways in which you would log a diaper. And so that's how we train our assistant at this point. So yeah, it's very low cost. It's possible. And we're just using the Google voice right now to have the interactions with the user.
And how are the users responding to that voice?
So that's interesting because I think they are pretty used to a bit of a robotic voice from other devices, but we did discover that when we have longer readouts, let's say an activity readout or a story readout, it could actually be beneficial to have an actor read it out. So they were even okay with this idea of having two voices in one assistant, but one is just more pleasant for longer readouts and the other one is a bit more robotic for things like logging, for example.
Great. Any other questions from the audience here? Yes.
Yeah, question. So when you're designing like a voice app for kids, kind of like best practices that would you recommend for like creating a persona that's for kids versus adults?
Best practices for persona for developing a kid's product.
Yeah, like mostly like K to 3.
K to 3?
Yeah.
So the question was, what are best practices for designing a persona targeting kids?
Really kid, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the experience we've produced so far have been from brands that already have a character. So we create one for the Wiggles, where we feature the Wiggles, or the kids from Stranger Things. But I think every brand is thinking about sonic branding and how they're going to sound in this new medium. And you think of like the most interesting chimes and user interfaces that or sounds that happen as you're flowing through a hardware device. Everybody's thinking about that right now. So there is a process as you go through to cast what that sounds like. Is it authoritative? Is it more friendly? I mean, you even look at like Barney the Purple Dinosaur versus Elmo, and people have been thinking about that for personas on TV, and now it's going in there. So I don't know if there's a specific answer. I think it has to match the brand and the product that you're looking at. But I guess something I can add to that is there are ways that you need to flow out an experience thinking about your kids in general. Like how do you remind them that there's a prompt that's coming up and that they need to tune in because there's some audio and all of a sudden it's asking them a question they have to respond to, and then the audio stops and they're like, oh, what happened, Or you don't answer in time, or you say something and it doesn't understand you. How do you respond in a way that they're not frustrated so that it says, okay, well, let's move on and continue with the experience and just assume we understood you. So I think those are the things that are more important in some ways, or more universal than what exactly the persona is. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I like the audio prompt that you brought up because it does seem like a lot of these devices do take a minute of learning, and it helps to sort of see somebody else do it. And of course, Alexa and Google being in so many homes, you're starting to pick up on these things. But there are full schools of thought on the types of tones and sounds that I believe you're supposed to add at the start or the end of a conversation that helps to clue and cue the user when to speak. So I thought that was interesting.
I think also as you're marketing your skill or action, thinking about video and ways that you can start to train them by, a lot of kids are on YouTube all the time, so creating a video so that it shows them what they can do on it and why they would want to play it, and just fun interactions, or social media. Those are the channels that I'm most excited about as a marketer for this type of space, because discoverability is definitely a challenge.
Yeah. was going to say, it's also fun to play around with expectations, right? To confound expectations. So we did an experimental Alexa skill, which is up there now, and it's called Who's on First. So if any of you remember this classic Abbott and Costello, so the voice app actually has this annoying, completely misunderstanding you all the time. And it's fun, you know, it's like a completely different, we could, yeah. Alexa, open Who's on First? That's not it. Alexa, no, that's not mine. This is the interesting question about like voice domains, like URLs and domain names, because there are multiples that you can have. So you want to enable mine versus whoever's visited. But I'm curious to hear about that.
Does anyone have any other skills that we can test on the spot right here, or games?
We have one.
Let's do it.
Okay. We have been playing with Canvas for the new screens, which is a Google solution. So we just launched. Hey Google, open the Wiggles. So this is
Game of the Wiggles.
Hi there, it's Emma Wiggle. You're here just in time. There's a Wiggles concert today. But I can't find any of my friends. Why don't you help me look for them? Wait, before we go, I can't decide which guitar to bring to the concert. I have so many. There's the orange guitar, the black guitar, the yellow guitar. What color guitar should I bring? Josh.
Green.
My green guitar. That's an excellent choice. Before we leave, let's look in the Wiggle house to see if any of our
Hey
friends
Google,
are here.
quick.
Do
Hey
you
Google,
want
quick.
to look in the living room?
Does anybody have a favorite skill that they use at home, as Caitlin said, besides the weather? Is there anyone who's interacting with a voice-activated product with a child at home?
I didn't like it. The other day, I said, hey Google, please stop. And there was a pause, and then she said, I like the way you asked me. And I thought, oh, I'm being conditioned, you know. But it also works for kid products, too.
Was it on the kids mode?
No.
Oh, interesting.
You know, one thing I wonder about is, people who work with immersive technologies like VR and others, a big word for them is presence, this notion that you have a sense of presence in some world. And what I've noticed having these devices around all the time is presence, but it's the presence of somebody else. It's like there are several presences in the room. You know, people like people. You kind of want to personify them. And, and they do have those different personalities. And I think just like anything else, you kind of read so much personality into them. You bring so much to the table. So I think that's probably one of the things you deal with a lot in designing, both what you're building and what you're building is, what meaning and what interpretations of character are people bringing to the table that are not even designed consciously into the product, of course.
In the nursery.
In the nursery,
Yeah, well, so actually for us, I think that just overall, like if you're interested in sonic branding, there's a lot of thought leadership around it right now. And I attended a conference called Voice back in the summer, and we had a workshop on how to design like a basic personality for an assistant. And actually you can reuse a lot of the tools that you would use for your typical brand as well. Just imagine that voice as a person. How do they look like? How do they dress? What's the smile on their face? And then you kind of go more into the actual qualities of the sound, because you can kind of create certain impressions in the user just by like pace and intonation, like what is going to distinguish your voice from the other voices, right? And so for us, we basically looked at our assistant as a sort of a coach, like this, experienced educator who's friendly but still authoritative, and we tried to describe it in many different ways. And then we try to match that personality with the voice. And so we did that all kind of in-house, even though there are agencies that you can hire to help you do that. But I think the basic personality can be created just by the core team, because you already know, I think, what you want the user to feel when they listen to the assistant. They want to be reassured or excited or calmed down. And so probably then when your product launches and picks up, maybe you'll be able to kind of go and have a more professional design of that personality. But I think it's possible to just like do an even 3-hour sprint on just like who do we want this person speaking out of the hardware to be.
Fantastic. Perfect. Unless there's any other questions, I'm gonna. Okay, we are gonna have one here.
I want to ask about educational use cases on voice. So we're building education voice first product on mobile app, but we're curious about skills or actions that actually got traction on Amazon or on Google. Are you aware? Are there skills or actions that you like and think have traction?
Skills that have traction in terms of market use, and maybe the question is also how do you market a new skill? And
beyond whether time.
Sure. It's a question I have as well, and I think it's something that everyone who's creating skills is trying to master it. And I think the beautiful thing that's happening right now, and I don't have an answer, but we'll see if the rest of our panel does, is that you do have this competition going on. Certainly Alexa has more devices, but both Google and Amazon recognize the importance of having these devices in the home and having people build on their ecosystem. And so I think the more that you can build a relationship early on with the folks inside those companies and listen to them for what they're looking for, and include them in your development process, the more likely that you might end up, God forbid, on a Super Bowl commercial where Amazon's paying for it because they're trying to get people to buy devices and to activate these skills. So that's my answer from a strategy for marketing, but are there anything to add here?
Are there success stories?
I'm not sure if it's educational per se. We work pretty closely with the folks at Hachette, book publisher, and they had one called Classroom 13, and it was based on an existing property, which is a very successful book series. Not exactly educational, but it did really well. And the reason it did well was because of the content itself. It was very well executed. But also, they were adopted, just as you said, by Amazon as a launch skill in that new Amazon, the Echo for Kids device, the Fire tablet, right? So I think we're still in the early days, and the marketing is really, there's no crossover breakout hit yet. There's a great phrase, the fertile void. You know, it's like there's a void, it's fertile, and something's going to pop out of it, but it really isn't quite there yet. So that's the good news and the bad news.
That's what I was afraid to hear.
Yes, I mean, I don't think I have a direct answer as well, but I have two examples. So one interesting example is also around books, and we're also interested in that. So let's say, a parent is reading a book to a child, and we can actually analyze what they're reading, and we know what the book is, and we can provide sound effects, let's say, to accompany the book. Another example, I don't know if that exists yet, but we've actually heard it from parents that we did our user testing with, when they kind of realized that, I could log a diaper here, or I could get an activity recommendation. They would naturally ask, can I also find events near me on the weekend, or like childcare? So they kind of immediately want to use an assistant to ask more parenting-related questions. So maybe that's an interesting approach, like to think of like what else would the user want to get from it.
So I just wanted to add a few stats. I know a few companies who are playing in this, but honestly, nobody shares any stats about success right now. Like I've heard of people who like monetized and were able to buy a Tesla. That was one of the panels at the most recent Voice Summit I was at with Ron in Tennessee. But it's unclear if developers are making money because they're being funded up front, or if they're actually able to sell things. Related to that, I think the emergence of peripherals and Bluetooth connected devices that are Alexa enabled or connect back to them as a gadget are really going to open up a new world for monetization. But that said, in recent research that I read from NPR, it was listed that 70% of parents who have an Alexa device in their home let their kids use them alone. And the top use cases, among other things like, telling a joke or asking about the weather or navigating a smart home device or listening to music, one of the top 5 is homework help. So I think also the platforms are thinking about this and trying to understand how they can have a first-party response to that. But of course, that means there's plenty of room for third parties alongside those assistant moments.
My interest is in conversation. I mean, what we're really trying to do is create an illusion with another person. And the conversations, when I'm asking for something, that's a very direct piece. But it doesn't often feel like it's very good at making conversations. At least that's my experience. And we're building character that responds. And so we're trying to figure out those problems. And we were talking with Emmett O'Neill from Story Toys in Ireland. They put out 3 Alexa products this year. And he said, it took us forever just to figure out the 22 ways that kids say yes. Yeah, I'll engage this whole list. And does everybody have to build all those by scratch? And so I think that's just getting yes, but trying to have a real conversation. I'm just wondering if anybody's had something that felt like it was a real conversation.
Well, just speaking of yes, I mean, there are, and this is not necessarily the answer, but it's what you're saying suggested to some extent. In the Alexa platform, there's something called a yes intent, right? And so you can add a yes intent, and then it has a whole range of synonyms. I'm wondering if they have yes for kids in there. Yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think, probably that's the path that they're going to have to, get to, because it's ridiculous that, in software development, it's a concept, DRY, don't repeat yourself. If you have all developers repeating themselves, solving the same problem that really is a systems level problem, eventually, if there's a commitment to the platform, I think that gets solved at the systems level. So hopefully they will have the intent.
Well, the other thing is, I think it's better than we think. David Kleeman from Dubbit recently shared some great research, and he said that it was in the 90% of how many people thought that it was a good experience. So I think it's rapidly improving, and there's a lot of super talented engineers working on this. And then the other thing, just harking back to one of my earlier responses, it takes a good conversation designer to understand where there are these pitfalls in the technology, if you can call it that, and to design around that so it's still a positive experience, I think.
Great. We'll do one more question and then save it for after. Scott?
Thank you so much. Curious what amount of thought you spend in localization of your products, and if that is part of your equation, how well do your language flowing constructing tools do it?
The question is around localization. What's your approach?
So currently I'm only building English and American English. The next one we're doing is French for historical reasons. And the tools are actually pretty good. If you're using the text-to-speech, there are voices that are, French-speaking voices or, German-speaking voices, and you can set up the localization. But you really have, in our case, there are 2 voices at a minimum. One is the system voice. Would you like more information? Do you need help? And the other is the narrator. And then you can have multiple other voices as well, which you can modify. So it's complex. All of the sort of core interface, system messaging, and the housekeeping of the app has to be translated and localized, as well as the content itself. So we're going to bite that off and chew on it after. And we're pretty stable now, and so that's why we're moving on to the French as the next language for us.
So we also didn't really have that problem yet, just because we're focusing on launching here in the US first and doing it well. But I can only imagine, let's say we wanted to make this in French, right? And let's say we have those sounds for books, and there's a dog woofing, and it will probably be a different sound in French. And another thing is, if we're using the Google voice, it's quite easy to translate some of these things and just use a different voice. But let's say if we're doing activity readouts, that would have to be recorded with a new actor in French. So yeah, that would be a quest.
Perfect.
I'll just add that we're not, at our level, we're not seeing the demand yet. English is still the lead, and again, we're operating here in the US, but there are tons of agencies that are popping up in other territories who are also pretty region specific from what I've seen. There is the ability to localize for sure, and encouragement from the platforms, but to Ron's point, I don't think it's going to be that difficult when we get there.
Perfect. Well, we will end it at that, and thank everybody for coming here tonight. I know a lot of you came from the peninsula. That's a tough commute. Thanks to Hacks and Cal for setting this up for us, and Leanna for helping to coordinate and film it. And for anyone who wants our information and just a follow-up, just be sure to sign up on the list here, and we'll follow up with an email just with links to who we are. But the purpose of this is bringing everybody together. We hope that this added some value to it. We hope to keep doing this. If you have ideas for discussions that you'd like us to have in future meetups, please reach out to Caitlin or myself. And anything else to add on that? I would just say,
I assume everyone came in through the meetup group, but that's one of our primary channels for talking, and we'd love to see conversations coming from that space. So feel free to post things there. We will be posting the video and some of the follow-up materials that we talked about. We love sharing information and making it a full conversation. So be active. Yeah.
perfect. Thanks again for coming. We appreciate it.